Hello there, and welcome to our journey back in time. I'm so glad you've decided to join me tonight, or whenever you're listening to this, whether you're settling in for sleep, taking a quiet moment during your day, or just curious about history, you're in for an interesting experience. Tonight, we're going to explore what life was really like in medieval prisons, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of just listing facts, we're going to follow the stories of real people who found themselves behind bars in the Middle Ages. We'll walk through their daily routines, hear their conversations, and understand how they survived in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Over the next hour or so, we'll meet Thomas the blacksmith, who was wrongly accused of theft, Eleanor the merchant's daughter, who spoke out against the local lord, and Marcus the former soldier who couldn't pay his debts. Through their eyes, we'll discover the surprising truths about medieval justice, prison food that was somehow worse than you can imagine, and the ingenious ways prisoners found to make their situations bearable. So get comfortable, close your eyes if you want to, and let's step back about 700 years to a time when justice worked very differently than it does today. Our story begins on a cold morning in 1347 in the town of Whitmore, somewhere in the English countryside. The sun hasn't quite risen yet, and most people are still asleep in their homes. But Thomas the blacksmith is wide awake, not because he wants to be, but because he's lying on a pile of moldy straw in the town's prison, and the rats have been particularly active tonight. Thomas shifts his weight carefully, trying not to disturb the other prisoners sleeping around him. The prison cell is about the size of a modern bedroom, but it houses 12 men. The walls are thick stone, with mortar that crumbles when you touch it. There's one small window, barely large enough to fit your head through, set high up near the ceiling. It's covered with iron bars that are rusty and bent, but still strong enough to keep everyone inside. The floor is bare earth, packed down hard by years of feet walking over it. In one corner, there's a bucket that serves as the toilet for all 12 men. The smell is overwhelming, a mixture of unwashed bodies, human waste, and something else that Thomas can't quite identify but suspects might be death. Thomas runs his hand through his hair, feeling the lice that have made themselves at home there. 3 weeks ago, he was a respected craftsman with his own forge and a small house near the market square. Now he's here, accused of stealing iron from Lord Hartwell's stores. He knows he's innocent, but in medieval England, being innocent doesn't guarantee your freedom. The accusation came from William the Steward, Lord Hartwell's right-hand man. Thomas had refused to make William a sword without payment, and apparently that was enough to make him an enemy. William simply told the Lord that he'd seen Thomas taking iron from the storehouse, and Thomas found himself arrested before sunset. As the first rays of sunlight creep through the small window, Thomas hears footsteps in the corridor outside. It's Edmund the jailer, making his morning rounds. Edmund is a thin man with a scraggly beard who seems to enjoy his job a little too much. He carries a large ring of keys that jangles as he walks, and he's always humming the same tune under his breath. "Morning, you miserable lot," Edmund calls out cheerfully as he approaches their cell. "Hope you slept well on your beds of luxury." Some of the prisoners groan and roll over, but Thomas sits up. He's learned that it's better to be awake and alert when Edmund is around. The jailer has a habit of testing the prisoners, looking for signs of weakness or rebellion. "Thomas the thief," Edmund says, stopping in front of the cell door. "Today's your lucky day. Lord Hartwell wants to see you." Thomas's heart begins to race. This could be good news or very bad news. In medieval prisons, you rarely left your cell except for 3 reasons. You were being released, you were being moved to a worse prison, or you were being taken to your execution. "What does he want?" Thomas asks, trying to keep his voice steady. Edmund grins, showing his yellow teeth. Not for me to say, but I'd wash your face if I were you. Can't have you looking like a pig when you meet his lordship. There's no real way to wash in the prison. The prisoners get 1 bucket of water per day, and it has to serve for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. Most of it goes for drinking, because the alternative is dying of thirst. Thomas splashes a little water on his face and hands, trying to look as presentable as possible. The other prisoners watch as Edmund unlocks the cell door. It's a massive wooden door, reinforced with iron bands, and it creaks loudly on its hinges. Edmund steps aside and gestures for Thomas to come out. Easy now, Edmund says, producing a set of shackles. Can't have you running off to cause trouble. The shackles are heavy iron chains that connect Thomas's wrists to his ankles. They're designed to allow walking, but prevent running or fighting. The metal is cold against his skin, and the weight makes every step an effort. As they walk through the prison corridors, Thomas gets a better look at his surroundings. The prison is built like a fortress, with thick stone walls and narrow passages. There are cells on both sides of the corridor, each one holding its own collection of unfortunate souls. He hears crying from one cell, angry shouting from another, and from a third, the sound of someone coughing violently. That's old Peter, Edmund says, noticing Thomas's attention. Been coughing like that for 2 months now. Probably won't last much longer. They pass a cell that seems different from the others. Instead of the usual collection of peasants and tradesmen, this one holds a woman in what was once a fine dress. Her hair is still partially arranged in an elaborate style, though it's now dirty and tangled. That's Eleanor, Edmund explains, merchant's daughter. Got herself in trouble for speaking against Lord Hartwell's tax increases. Been here about a month now. Eleanor looks up as they pass, and Thomas sees intelligence in her eyes, along with a determination that prison hasn't managed to break yet. She nods slightly at Thomas, a gesture of solidarity between fellow prisoners. A corridor opens into a larger chamber that serves as the prison's main hall. Here, the more privileged prisoners are allowed to spend their days. They have to pay for this privilege, of course. Everything in medieval prison costs money, from better food to cleaner straw to time outside the cell. Thomas sees a group of men sitting around a rough wooden table playing dice. One of them he recognizes as Marcus, a former soldier who was imprisoned for debt. Marcus had fought in the king's army for 15 years, but when he returned home, he found his family's farm in ruins and debts that he couldn't pay. Thomas, Marcus calls out, "Where are you off to?" "Lord Hartwell wants to see him." Edmund answers before Thomas can speak. "Might be his last day among us." Marcus nods grimly. He's been in prison long enough to know that summons from the Lord rarely end well for the prisoner. They continue through the prison, passing the kitchen where the prisoner's food is prepared. Thomas catches a glimpse of the cook, a woman named Agnes, who seems to take pride in making the food as unpalatable as possible. She's stirring a large pot of what looks like watery porridge with occasional lumps of something that might once have been meat. "Breakfast is served in an hour," Edmund says, "though I suppose you might not be here to enjoy it." Finally, they reach the door that leads from the prison to the Lord's manor. It's heavily guarded, with 2 soldiers standing on either side. They nod at Edmund and step aside to let them pass. The contrast between the prison and the manor is striking. Suddenly, Thomas finds himself in a world of tapestries, carved wooden furniture, and floors covered with rushes that are changed regularly. The air smells of herbs and cooking food instead of human misery. They walk through several rooms before reaching Lord Hartwell's private chamber. The Lord is sitting behind a large wooden desk, writing in a ledger. He's a man of about 50, with graying hair and the soft look of someone who's never done physical labor in his life. Ah, Thomas the blacksmith, Lord Hartwell says without looking up from his writing. Do you know why you're here? Because your steward accused me of theft, my lord, Thomas replies. But I swear to you, I'm innocent. Lord Hartwell finally looks up, and Thomas sees something in his eyes that gives him hope. It's not the look of a man who's already decided on a death sentence. Yes, about that, the Lord says. It seems there's been some confusion. My steward William has been doing his own investigation, and he's discovered that the missing iron was actually used for repairs to the manor's gates. The records were simply misfiled. Thomas feels his knees go weak with relief. Does this mean I'm free to go, my lord? Well, not quite yet. Lord Hartwell says, there's still the matter of your imprisonment. Someone has to pay for your food and lodging these past 3 weeks. I believe the amount comes to 2 shillings. 2 shillings is a fortune for a blacksmith. It's more than Thomas would normally earn in a month. But he knows better than to argue with a lord who's offering him freedom. I'll pay it, my lord, Thomas says quickly. Excellent. Edmund will escort you back to collect your belongings, and then you can be on your way. As they walk back through the manor, Thomas's mind is racing. He's free, but he's also ruined. 2 shillings will take everything he has saved, and he'll have to start over from nothing. But at least he's alive, and that's more than many prisoners can say. Back in the prison, the news of Thomas's release spreads quickly. The other prisoners gather around him as he collects his few possessions, a small knife, a leather pouch, and a wooden cup that his father had carved for him.
You're the lucky one, says Marcus. Most of us won't be seeing the outside world again.
Eleanor approaches from her cell. Thomas, she says quietly, if you're truly innocent, then speak for us who are still here. Tell people what you've seen. Thomas nods. He knows that many of the prisoners are guilty of the crimes they're accused of, but he also knows that many others are innocent or guilty only of being poor and powerless. As Edmund escorts him out of the prison, Thomas takes one last look at the place that has been his home for 3 weeks. The other prisoners are already settling into their daily routines. Some are playing dice or cards, others are talking quietly among themselves, and a few are just sitting in silence, staring at the walls. The prison day is just beginning. Soon Agnes will bring around the morning meal, which consists of a bowl of thin porridge and a cup of weak ale. The porridge is made from whatever grain is cheapest at the moment, usually oats or barley, and it's cooked with water instead of milk to save money. Sometimes there are chunks of vegetables in it, but they're usually rotted or spoiled. After breakfast, the prisoners are allowed to move around the main hall for a few hours. This is when most of the socializing happens. The men tell stories, share news from the outside world, and sometimes teach each other skills that might be useful if they ever get out. Marcus often talks about his time as a soldier. He fought in battles across England and France, and he has stories that can keep the other prisoners entertained for hours. He tells them about the siege of Calais, where he spent 6 months living in a tent outside the city walls, eating nothing but salted pork and hard bread. The funny thing about war, Marcus says, is that it's mostly boring. You spend months doing nothing but waiting, and then suddenly everything happens at once. 1 minute you're playing dice with your friends, and the next minute you're fighting for your life. Eleanor, when she's allowed out of her cell, brings a different perspective. As a merchant's daughter, she's traveled to many different towns and cities. She knows about trade routes, foreign customs, and the political situations in other kingdoms. In France, she tells the other prisoners, they have a different system of justice. If you're accused of a crime, you can demand a trial by combat. You can fight for your innocence, or hire someone to fight for you. Sounds like a better system than ours, says one of the other prisoners, a man named John, who was imprisoned for stealing a chicken. At least you'd have a chance to prove yourself. Maybe, Eleanor says, but it also means that the strongest person wins, not necessarily the most innocent. The prisoners spend a lot of time talking about food. When you're constantly hungry, it becomes an obsession. They describe meals they've had in the past, dishes their mothers used to make, and elaborate feasts they've heard about but never experienced. My wife made the best meat pies, says a man named Robert, who was imprisoned for poaching deer. She'd use whatever meat we could get, usually rabbit or pigeon, and she'd add herbs from our garden. The crust was always perfect, never too thick or too thin. I once saw a feast at the manor house, says another prisoner. They had a whole roasted pig with an apple in its mouth, and there were dozens of different dishes, things I'd never even heard of before. Peacock and swan, and something called marchpane that was made from ground almonds. The afternoon meal is usually the same as breakfast, another bowl of porridge and some ale. Sometimes, if the prisoners are lucky, there might be a bit of cheese or a small piece of bread. But mostly, it's just the porridge. The evenings are the hardest time. As the sun sets and darkness fills the prison, the prisoners have nothing to do but think about their situations. Some of them pray. Others just lie on their straw and stare at the ceiling. A few of the more educated prisoners, like Eleanor, sometimes recite poetry or tell stories from books they've read. I know a story about a knight who was imprisoned in a tower. Eleanor says one evening, he was accused of treason, but he was innocent. He spent 7 years in that tower, and every day he carved a mark on the wall to keep track of time. Eventually, he was proven innocent and released, but by then he was an old man. What happened to him then? Asks Marcus. He became a monk, Eleanor says. He said that his time in prison had taught him that worldly things weren't important. He spent the rest of his life helping other prisoners and trying to reform the justice system. The prisoners' conversations often turned to their families and the lives they've left behind. Many of them have wives and children who are struggling to survive without them. In medieval society, if the head of a household is imprisoned, the rest of the family often faces poverty and starvation. My son is only 8 years old, says Robert. He's probably having to work in the fields now, doing a man's job, and my wife, she's never been strong. I don't know how she's managing without me. At least your family is still together, says another prisoner, an older man named Jeffrey. My wife died while I was in here. They sent word 3 weeks ago. I couldn't even go to her funeral. These conversations are heartbreaking, but they're also important. They help the prisoners maintain their humanity in a place designed to strip it away. They remind each other that they're not just criminals or numbers, but human beings with families and histories and dreams. The sleeping arrangements in the prison are primitive and uncomfortable. The prisoners sleep on piles of straw that are changed infrequently. The straw is often moldy and infested with insects, but it's better than sleeping on the bare stone floor. In winter, the prisoners huddle together for warmth. The prison has no heating system, and the thick stone walls that keep people in also keep warmth out. Many prisoners develop coughs and fevers during the cold months, and some don't survive until spring. The trick is to stay dry, Marcus advises the newer prisoners. If your clothes get wet, you'll never get warm again. And if you start coughing, try to sleep sitting up. It helps keep the fluid from building up in your lungs. The prisoners also have to deal with various health problems that come from poor nutrition and unsanitary conditions. Scurvy is common, caused by lack of fresh fruits and vegetables. The prisoners' teeth become loose, their gums bleed, and they develop painful sores on their skin. In the army, we learned to eat anything green we could find, Marcus explains, even grass, if it came to that. It's not tasty, but it keeps the scurvy away. The prison has no medical care to speak of. If a prisoner gets seriously ill, they're left to recover on their own or die. The jailer, Edmund, sometimes brings herbs or simple remedies, but only if the prisoner can pay for them. I knew a man who broke his leg in here, says Geoffrey. He set it himself, using strips of wood and cloth. It healed crooked, but at least he could walk on it. Despite the harsh conditions, the prisoners find ways to maintain some semblance of normal life. They create routines and traditions that help them cope with their situation. Every Sunday, Eleanor leads a sort of informal church service, reciting prayers and Bible passages from memory. Even in this place, we can still connect with God, she says, maybe especially in this place. Some of the prisoners are remarkably creative in finding ways to improve their situation. Marcus has figured out how to catch and cook the rats that infest the prison. It's not appetizing, but it provides much-needed protein. The trick is to skin them properly, he explains, and you have to cook them thoroughly, or you'll get sick, but when you're hungry enough, they don't taste too bad. The prisoners also develop a complex economy within the prison walls. Those who have money can buy better food, cleaner clothes, and other luxuries from the outside world. But money doesn't always come from the outside. Some prisoners earn money by providing services to others. Eleanor, for example, helps illiterate prisoners write letters to their families. She charges a small fee for this service, which she uses to buy better food and warmer clothes. Marcus earns money by teaching other prisoners useful skills like how to repair clothes or make simple tools. Everything here has a price, Eleanor explains. Even friendship costs something. But if you're smart about it, you can make prison life bearable. The guards and jailers are a constant presence in the prisoners' lives. Most of them are corrupt and willing to do favors for money. They smuggle in food, deliver messages, and sometimes even allow visits from family members, all for the right price. Edmund, the head jailer, is particularly mercenary. He's been known to accept bribes to allow prisoners to escape, though he's careful to only help those who can pay enough to make it worth his while. Edmund's not evil, Marcus observes. He's just practical. He knows that his job doesn't pay well, so he finds other ways to make money. As long as you don't cause trouble and you pay your debts, he'll treat you fairly. The legal system that puts people in prison is often arbitrary and unfair. Many prisoners are there not because they committed serious crimes, but because they couldn't pay their debts or because they offended someone with power and influence. The law is different for different people, Eleanor says bitterly. If you're rich, you can buy your way out of almost any trouble. If you're poor, you can be imprisoned for the smallest offense. She tells the story of how she ended up in prison. As the daughter of a successful merchant, she had a comfortable life and a good education. But when Lord Hartwell imposed new taxes on the merchants in town, she spoke out against them at a public meeting. I said that the taxes were unfair and that they would drive honest merchants out of business, she recalls. I thought I was exercising my right to speak freely, but apparently Lord Hartwell saw it as rebellion. The next day, she was arrested and charged with sedition. There was no trial, no chance to defend herself, just a quick appearance before Lord Hartwell's steward, and then straight to prison. My father tried to negotiate for my release, she continues. He offered to pay the taxes, to make a public apology, even to leave town permanently. But Lord Hartwell refused. He said I needed to learn respect for authority. Stories like Eleanor's are common in the prison. Many of the inmates are there not because they're dangerous criminals, but because they've somehow offended the wrong person or found themselves on the wrong side of a political dispute. The prison also houses genuine criminals, of course. There are thieves, murderers, and other violent offenders mixed in with the political prisoners and debtors. This creates a complex social dynamic within the prison walls. You learn to read people quickly in here, Marcus says. You need to know who you can trust and who you need to avoid. Some of these men are dangerous, but others are just unlucky. He tells the story of a man named Black Tom, who was imprisoned for murder. Tom had killed a man in a tavern fight, but it was self-defense. The man Tom killed was trying to rob him, and Tom was just protecting himself. But the dead man had friends in high places, and Tom found himself charged with murder. Tom's not a bad man, Marcus explains. He's just someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but he's been labeled a murderer, and that's how he'll be remembered. The daily routine in the prison is regulated by the bells of the nearby church. The prisoners wake at dawn, eat their meager breakfast, spend the day in the common area or their cells, eat their evening meal, and then settle down for the night. It's a monotonous existence that can drive men to despair. The hardest part is the boredom, says Jeffrey. You can get used to the hunger and the cold, but having nothing to do day after day, that's what really breaks you down. Some prisoners try to stay busy by creating things. They carve small figures out of wood or bone, weave baskets from straw, or even write poetry on scraps of cloth. These activities help pass the time and maintain a sense of purpose. I'm carving a chess set, says a prisoner named William. I've been working on it for 6 months now. When I'm finished, we'll be able to play proper games instead of just dice. The food in the prison is deliberately kept at near starvation levels. This serves two purposes. It keeps costs down, and it weakens the prisoners so they're less likely to cause trouble. The daily ration is barely enough to keep a person alive, much less healthy. They feed us just enough so we don't die, Eleanor observes, but not enough so we have any energy to fight back. It's a calculated cruelty. The morning porridge is thin and watery, made from the cheapest grains available. Sometimes it's made from barley, sometimes from oats, and occasionally from a mixture of different grains that are past their prime. The cooks add water to stretch it as far as possible, resulting in a gruel that's more liquid than solid. I've seen them make the porridge, says Robert. They start with a handful of grain and add water until it fills the pot. Then they add more water for good measure. The evening meal is usually the same porridge, sometimes with a small piece of bread or a bit of cheese. On special occasions, like religious holidays, the prisoners might get a thin soup with a few vegetables or a small piece of meat. Christmas dinner last year was memorable, Marcus recalls with dark humor. We each got a slice of bread and a piece of cheese the size of a coin, and they told us we should be grateful for the Lord's generosity. The prisoners supplement their diet in various ways. Those who can afford it buy food from the guards. Others eat anything they can catch or find, including rats, insects, and edible weeds that grow in the prison yard. You'd be surprised what you can eat when you're hungry enough, says Jeffrey. I've eaten things in here that I never would have touched on the outside. The lack of proper nutrition leads to various health problems. The prisoners suffer from constant hunger, weakness, and malnutrition-related diseases. Many lose significant weight during their imprisonment, and some never fully recover their health even after release. I was a strong man when I came in here, says Robert. I could swing an axe all day without getting tired. Now I can barely lift a bucket of water. The water situation in the prison is also problematic. The prisoners get 1 bucket of water per day for their entire cell, which has to serve for drinking, cooking, and washing. The water comes from a well in the prison yard, but it's often contaminated with waste and debris. The trick is to let the water sit for a while before drinking it. Marcus advises. The dirt settles to the bottom, and you can drink from the top. It's not clean, but it's better than nothing. Many prisoners develop stomach problems from drinking the contaminated water. Dysentery is common, which only makes the sanitation problems worse. The single bucket that serves as a toilet for 12 men is emptied once a day, if the prisoners are lucky. The smell is the worst part, says Eleanor. You never get used to it. It gets into your clothes, your hair, everything. Sometimes I think I'll never feel clean again. The prison has a small yard where prisoners are sometimes allowed to exercise. It's surrounded by high walls and heavily guarded, but it provides a welcome break from the confines of the cells. The yard is about the size of a large room, with bare earth and a few weeds growing along the walls. The first time I saw the sky again, after 2 weeks in the cell, I almost cried, says Jeffrey. I'd forgotten how blue it was. The prisoners are allowed in the yard for about an hour a day, weather permitting. They use this time to walk around, breathe fresh air, and sometimes just stand in the sunlight. It's a small pleasure, but in prison, small pleasures become enormously important. I like to watch the clouds, says William. They remind me that there's a whole world out there beyond these walls. Sometimes I imagine I'm lying in a field, watching them drift by. The guards use the yard time as another opportunity to make money. They'll allow longer visits to the yard or access to the yard during restricted times for the right price. They also sometimes smuggle in items that prisoners have requested from the outside world. I paid Edmund 2 pennies to bring me a flower from the garden, Eleanor confesses. It was just a small daisy, but I kept it for a week before it died. It made me feel human again. The relationship between prisoners and guards is complex. The guards have absolute power over the prisoners' daily lives, but they're also dependent on the prisoners for the bribes and fees that supplement their small wages. This creates a delicate balance of power and mutual dependence. You have to understand the guards' position, Marcus explains. They're not paid well, and they have to deal with desperate people all day long. Some of them are cruel because they enjoy it, but others are just trying to make a living. The guards vary in their treatment of prisoners. Some are genuinely sadistic and enjoy inflicting suffering. Others are indifferent, just doing their job without caring about the prisoner's welfare. A few are even sympathetic, though they rarely show it openly. There's one guard, Peter, who sometimes gives us extra food, says Robert. He never says anything about it, just leaves an extra portion when he thinks no one is looking. I think he has a family of his own and knows what it's like to be hungry. The prisoners develop strategies for dealing with different guards. They learn which ones can be bribed, which ones should be avoided, and which ones might be sympathetic to a reasonable request. It's a survival skill that can mean the difference between bearable and unbearable conditions. Edmund is greedy but fair, Eleanor summarizes. If you pay him, he'll keep his word. Peter is kind but powerless, and there's another one, Godwin, who's just mean. He enjoys making us suffer, and there's no reasoning with him. The seasonal changes affect prison life significantly. Winter is the harshest time, with cold temperatures, shorter days, and reduced food supplies. The prisoners huddle together for warmth and spend more time in their cells because the yard is often too cold to use. Last winter, we lost 3 men to the cold, Jeffrey recalls. They just couldn't keep warm enough. By morning, they were frozen solid. Spring brings hope and relief as the weather warms and fresh food becomes available. The prisoners can spend more time in the yard, and sometimes the guards bring vegetables or herbs that supplement their diet. Spring is like being reborn, says William. After months of darkness and cold, the warm sun feels like a blessing. Even the prison food tastes better when you're not shivering while you eat it. Summer is the most comfortable time, with warm weather and longer days. The prison yard becomes more pleasant, and the prisoners can sometimes dry their clothes and bedding in the sun. However, summer also brings its own problems, including insects, heat, and the smell of unwashed bodies in close quarters. Summer means flies, Marcus observes. Thousands of them. They get into the food, the water, everything, and with all of us packed together, the smell gets overwhelming. Autumn is a time of preparation for winter. The prisoners try to gather whatever extra clothing or bedding they can find. Those with money buy warmer clothes from the guards, while others make do with whatever they can improvise. You learn to think ahead in here, says Eleanor. If you don't prepare for winter, you might not survive it. The prison's relationship with the outside world is limited but important. Prisoners who have families sometimes receive visits, though these are strictly controlled and expensive. The guards charge fees for allowing visits, and the meetings are brief and supervised. My wife came to see me once, says Robert. She had to pay Edmund 5 pennies for a 10-minute visit. She brought news from home and a small piece of bread she'd saved from her own meal. It was the best bread I'd ever tasted. News from the outside world filters into the prison through various channels. New prisoners bring information about recent events, and the guards sometimes share gossip or news. This information is precious to the prisoners, who feel cut off from the world they once knew. We heard that there was a good harvest this year, says Jeffrey. That means food prices might go down, and maybe the porridge will be a little thicker. The prisoners also hear about political events, wars, and other major happenings. This information helps them understand the context of their imprisonment and sometimes gives them hope that their situations might change. There's talk of a new law that would limit how long people can be held without trial, Eleanor says hopefully. If it passes, it might help some of us get out of here. The prison economy extends beyond the walls, with families and friends on the outside, sometimes sending money or goods to help their imprisoned relatives. This creates a network of relationships that can provide lifelines for desperate prisoners. My brother sends me a penny every month, says William. It's not much, but it buys me a little extra food and helps me stay alive. The staff of the prison includes more than just guards and jailers. There are cooks, cleaners, and other workers who provide services to the prisoners. These people are often poor themselves, and sometimes sympathetic to the prisoner's plight. Agnes the cook is harsh, but she's also practical, Marcus observes. If you slip her a coin, she might add a bit of meat to your porridge. She's not doing it to be kind, but it still helps. The prisoners also encounter various officials and administrators who visit the prison. These might include clerks, tax collectors, and representatives of the Lord or the church. Some of these visitors are indifferent to the prisoner's suffering, while others are genuinely shocked by the conditions they see. A priest came through here last month, says Eleanor. He was appalled by what he saw. He said he was going to speak to the bishop about conditions here. I don't know if anything will come of it, but at least someone in authority has seen the truth. The prison's role in the medieval justice system is complex and often arbitrary. It serves not just as punishment for crimes, but as a way to control political dissent, collect debts, and maintain social hierarchy. Many prisoners are there not because they're dangerous, but because they've somehow challenged the existing order. This place isn't really about justice, Eleanor says bitterly. It's about power. They put us here to remind everyone else what happens when you don't obey. The length of sentences varies widely and often depends more on politics and economics than on the severity of the crime. Some prisoners are held for weeks, others for years, and some are never released at all. The uncertainty is one of the most difficult aspects of prison life. Nobody knows how long they'll be here, says Marcus. You could be released tomorrow, Or you could die in this cell. The not knowing is almost worse than the knowing would be. Some prisoners are held until they can pay their debts, others until they've served a predetermined sentence, and still others until they die. The conditions of release are often unclear, and prisoners sometimes find themselves held long past their supposed release dates. I was supposed to be released 6 months ago, says one prisoner, but they keep finding new charges, new fees, new reasons to keep me here. I think they've forgotten what I was originally accused of. The prison reflects the broader inequalities of medieval society. Wealthy prisoners can buy better conditions, while poor prisoners suffer the worst treatment. This creates a hierarchy within the prison that mirrors the social hierarchy outside. Even in prison, money talks, Jeffrey observes. If you can afford it, you can live almost comfortably. If you can't, you live like an animal. The psychological effects of imprisonment are severe and long-lasting. Many prisoners develop depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems. The combination of isolation, poor conditions, and uncertainty about the future takes a heavy toll on mental well-being. I've seen strong men break down and cry like children, says Marcus, and I've seen gentle men become violent and angry. This place changes you, and not always for the better. The prisoners develop various coping mechanisms to maintain their mental health. Some turn to religion, others to friendship and mutual support, and still others to dreams and fantasies about life after prison. I spend a lot of time thinking about what I'll do when I get out, says William. I plan every detail of my first day of freedom, where I'll go, what I'll eat, who I'll see first. It helps me stay sane. The lack of privacy in prison is particularly difficult for people who are used to having their own space. 12 men sharing a cell, meant for half that number, creates constant tension and conflict. You learn to find privacy in your own mind, Eleanor says. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine I'm back in my father's garden, sitting under the apple tree with a book. It's not real, but for a few minutes I'm free. The prisoner's personal hygiene suffers greatly under these conditions. With limited water and no soap, they become dirty and infested with lice and fleas. Their clothes, worn day and night for months, become ragged and foul-smelling. I used to bathe every week, says Robert. Now I haven't had a proper wash in 3 months. I probably smell like a stable, but after a while you stop noticing. The prisoner's appearance changes dramatically during their imprisonment. They lose weight, their skin becomes pale and sickly, and their hair grows long and unkempt. Many develop sores and rashes from the poor conditions. When I first came here, I was proud of my appearance, says Jeffrey. Now I look like a beggar. If my wife saw me now, she might not recognize me. Despite the harsh conditions, the prisoners maintain their humanity through small acts of kindness and mutual support. They share food when they can, comfort each other during difficult times, and celebrate small victories together. When Robert got word that his wife was still alive, we all shared in his joy, Marcus recalls, and when William learned that his son had died, we all mourned with him. In here, we're all we have. The prisoners develop a code of conduct that helps them coexist in the cramped conditions. They establish rules about sharing space, dividing food, and resolving conflicts. These unofficial rules are enforced by peer pressure and the threat of ostracism. If you steal from another prisoner, you become an outcast, Eleanor explains. Nobody will share with you, nobody will talk to you, and nobody will help you if you get sick. It's a death sentence. The storytelling tradition among prisoners serves multiple purposes beyond entertainment. It helps preserve their individual identities, maintains connections to the outside world, and provides a form of education for those who can't read or write. Every man has a story, says Marcus. Some are sad, some are funny, some are frightening, but they're all important because they remind us who we are and where we came from. The prisoners often talk about their dreams and aspirations for life after prison. These conversations help maintain hope and provide motivation to survive the daily hardships. I'm going to buy a small farm, says Robert. Nothing fancy, just enough land to grow my own food and keep a few animals. I never want to depend on anyone else again. I want to travel, says Eleanor. I want to see the great cathedrals and universities I've heard about. I want to learn about the world beyond this village. The arrival of new prisoners is always a significant event. They bring fresh news from the outside world, but they also upset the delicate balance of relationships within the prison. Established prisoners have to make room for newcomers and integrate them into the existing social structure. New prisoners always ask the same questions. Jeffrey observes. How long will I be here? What's the food like? Is there any way to escape? We've all asked those questions, and we all know the answers are usually disappointing. The veterans teach newcomers the unwritten rules of prison survival. They explain which guards to avoid, how to make the food more palatable, and how to stay warm during the cold nights. The first rule is to never show weakness. Marcus advises new prisoners. If the guards think you're broken, they'll make your life even worse. And if the other prisoners think you're weak, they might take advantage of you. The prisoners' relationships with their families on the outside are complicated by their imprisonment. Some families remain loyal and supportive, while others abandon their imprisoned relatives to avoid the shame and expense. My brother visits me sometimes, says William, but my sister won't even acknowledge that I exist anymore. She's afraid that being associated with a prisoner will hurt her reputation. The economic impact of imprisonment extends beyond the prisoners themselves to their families and communities. When breadwinners are imprisoned, their families often face poverty and hardship. This creates a cycle of suffering that affects entire communities. My family was doing well before I was arrested, says Robert. Now my wife is working as a servant to put food on the table, and my children are wearing rags. My imprisonment has ruined all of us. The prisoner's relationship with religion is complex and varied. Some find comfort in prayer and religious observance, while others lose their faith entirely. The harsh conditions and apparent injustice of their situations challenge their beliefs about divine justice and mercy. I used to believe that God rewarded the good and punished the wicked, says Jeffrey, but I've seen too many good men suffer and too many evil men prosper. Now I don't know what to believe. Eleanor leads Sunday services for those who want to participate. She recites prayers and Bible passages from memory, and the prisoners sing hymns together. These services provide a sense of community and spiritual comfort. Even if God seems far away, we still have each other, Eleanor says, and maybe that's enough. The prisoners' work opportunities are limited and poorly paid. Some are assigned to tasks like cleaning the prison or preparing food, while others might be hired out to work on local farms or construction projects. The wages are tiny, but they provide a small income that can be used to buy better food or other necessities. I work in the kitchen 3 days a week, says one prisoner. I earn a halfpenny per day, but it means I get to eat the scraps from the cook pot. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. The skills that prisoners learn from each other sometimes prove valuable, both inside and outside the prison. Marcus teaches others how to set broken bones and treat common illnesses. Eleanor teaches reading and writing to those who want to learn. These skills can make the difference between life and death in the harsh prison environment. Knowledge is the one thing they can't take away from you, Eleanor says, "Everything else can be stolen or lost, but what you know stays with you forever." The prisoner's legal knowledge is usually limited, but they learn from experience and from each other. They develop an understanding of the legal system that governs their lives, though this knowledge is often more practical than theoretical. "The law is whatever the Lord says it is," Marcus explains to a new prisoner. "Don't expect fairness or consistency. Just try to stay out of trouble and hope for the best." Some prisoners attempt to appeal their sentences or seek legal remedies for their situations. These efforts are usually unsuccessful, but they provide hope and give the prisoners a sense that they're fighting for their freedom. "I've written 3 letters to the king's court," says Eleanor. "I know they probably never reached anyone important, but at least I tried. I won't give up without a fight." The changing seasons bring different challenges and opportunities for the prisoners. In spring, they might be able to gather edible plants from the prison yard. In summer, they can dry their clothes and bedding. In autumn, they prepare for the harsh winter ahead. In winter, they focus on survival. "Each season has its own rhythm," says Marcus. "You learn to adapt to the changes and make the best of whatever conditions you face." The prison's location affects the prisoner's experiences in various ways. Those held in urban prisons might have more contact with the outside world, while those in rural prisons might have access to fresh air and natural surroundings. The local economy and politics also influence prison conditions. "This prison is better than some I've heard about," says Jeffrey. "At least we're not in a dungeon underground, and the Lord here isn't completely cruel, just indifferent." The prisoners' stories eventually come to an end, though not always in the way they hope. Some are released after serving their sentences or paying their debts. Others die in prison from disease, malnutrition, or old age. A few escape, though successful escapes are rare and usually temporary. "I've seen men walk out of here free, and I've seen them carried out dead," says Marcus. "The only thing certain about this place is uncertainty." And so life continues within the stone walls of the medieval prison, day after day, season after season. The prisoners adapt, survive, and sometimes even find moments of joy and humanity in the darkest of circumstances. Their stories remind us that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit can endure and even flourish. "We're still here," Eleanor says simply. "Despite everything they've done to us, we're still here, and as long as we're alive, there's hope." The sun sets on another day in the prison, and the prisoners settle down for another night on their beds of straw. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same hardships, and the same small victories, but it will also bring another day of life, another chance for freedom, and another opportunity to prove that the human spirit cannot be completely broken, no matter how dark the circumstances may seem. Their voices fade into the night, but their stories live on, reminding us of a time when justice was harsh, mercy was rare, and survival required both strength and compassion. In their struggles, we see reflections of our own capacity for endurance, hope, and humanity.